A new study has revealed that the public significantly overestimates how much UK immigration is made up of asylum seekers. On average, people think that asylum seekers account for around about 37% of total immigration, when in fact it's closer to just 7%. And asylum seekers and illegal immigration, of course, is a hugely important topic. But don't forget, 1.2 million people entered the country legally in the past year, putting a huge strain on housing and public services. So do these figures suggest that the public is being bamboozled about the scale of legal migration as the pressure builds on the government to manage migration effectively? This research highlights the need for a clearer understanding of who is coming into the UK and why. Well, to discuss this, I'm now joined by a magnificent panel this evening, and that is my panel of Dame Andrea Jenkins, the former Conservative MP and Minister, and of course the human rights campaigner and activist Peter Tatchell. Welcome to you both. Let's start off with you, if we could, Dame Andrea. And I don't know about you, but when I hear this thing about nothing to see here, it's only 7%, it's 7% of a flipping great big number. Absolutely. People still have the right to be annoyed, then. They're at least concerned about the numbers and the types of people coming into our country. Dame Andrea.
I mean, as a former MP, it was the biggest thing in my post box, illegal migration and the whole migration figures. I mean, one good thing that the Conservatives did, they limited the amount that students could bring their loved ones, etc. And I think we've started seeing those figures come through now. But 7%, like you said, it's a crazy amount. And when people can't get the children in the schools that they want, they can't get a doctor's appointment, a dentist's appointment, and we're still finding people waiting 4 or 5 years to get onto a housing list. So I think people's quite rightly had enough.
Peter Tatchell, do you think these kind of studies they're meant to try and downplay the issue? People think it's a third. It's actually only 7%. What's your takeaway from that? Is that because you think the media obsesses with asylum seekers too much and whips it up?
I think there's certainly some sections of the media and some right-wing politicians who are using the asylum issue as a political weapon. They're weaponising people who, in most cases, have a genuine fear of persecution and are fleeing conflict and war.
Well, is that true?
Yes,
it's mainly blokes, isn't it? With iPhones.
most people who seek asylum do eventually get it because the Home Office adjudicators look at their case in forensic detail and do assess that they have a legitimate fear of persecution. The other thing to point out is that...
They come from France, Peter, most of them. France isn't a country where they're being persecuted.
Yes, but they come ultimately from Syria.
And they suddenly turn Christian, don't they? As we've seen recently.
There are a small number of people who are gaming the system, and that's wrong, totally. But many of them are genuine, and they also have assets that are good for our country. So my foundation, the Peter Tatchell Foundation, a human rights body, we have helped lots of people secure asylum. We've only ever had, in the hundreds and hundreds, people, one person who we had doubts about, and we did not proceed with that. On top of that, many of these people have skills we need. Doctors, dentists, nurses, plumbers, carpenters.
Peter, we hear that all the time. You are not telling me nuclear physicists are swarming over the channel.
No, not nuclear physicists. No, that's true. But we do underestimate the economic benefit that genuine legal asylum seekers who get their cases assessed and are approved, we underestimate the contribution they make to the country. I'll just give you one example. After the Iraq War, I helped an Iraqi doctor get asylum in this country. His payback, he could have gone into Guy's or St Thomas's Hospital, got a top job. He was a very highly qualified person. But he chose to go to a remote Scottish community where they had no GP. And he stayed there for 5 years to show his appreciation to Britain, to giving him a place of safety. That was of huge benefit to that Scottish community.
But meanwhile, in the real world, the vast majority of asylum seekers coming here illegally at any rate are low-skilled. And in fact, data came out last week, Dame Andrea, that each one of them costs £250,000 net by the time their age, a pension age, goes to £1 million each if they live to 100 and £750,000 if they live to 75. So I'm sure your Iraqi doctor, mate, was a superb contribution to the UK. But is that actually the majority?
No, of course it's not. And what I'd like to ask Peter is, talk about human rights. What about the rights of the British people? You know, they are struggling to pay their bills. I had so many constituents, especially, you know, still writing to me as an ex-MP about pensioners' fuel allowance being lost, not being able to get children into the schools, and they're struggling. They can't get a doctor's appointment. What about the rights of the British people?
I agree there are problems, and I empathise with people who are struggling. But to blame asylum applicants is just monstrous. It's not true. Well, you know, these problems existed.
But isn't it a question of numbers? More people come into the country, so we're, you know, at its on our knees anyway. So there's less school places, less doctors' places. So it's not a blame game. This is numbers.
This deficiency of doctors in schools has existed for years, even decades, because of underinvestment by successive Labour and Conservative governments. To blame refugees and migrants for the problem is just completely out of proportion. We have 171 billionaires in this country. They could easily afford to pay a 1% wealth tax. It's nothing to them.
They already pay the most tax.
But they're also leaving under Labour, aren't they?
Hang on. They could afford to pay a 1% or 2% wealth tax, and that would raise at least $6 billion every year on a recurring basis. Now, they wouldn't actually lose anything because their net wealth is increasing by 5 to 10% every year anyway. So it's really easy to make those with the broadest shoulders pay a little bit more. If they're true patriots, if they really believe in Britain, if they love this country,
what if they're not British?
They will make.
What if they're not British? What if they're billionaires from Hong Kong or America or Switzerland?
Well, if they're living here,
clear off.
If they're here, then they have a duty and obligation to pay their fair share. And the number of millionaires leaving is, I think, 9,000 out of 2.5 million.
That's 9,000 too many.
It's peanuts.
Back to your numbers, it costs £8 billion per annum in unemployment benefits for those who were born abroad.
Yeah,
so you're talking about the numbers. The numbers are we spend 6 times as much on unemployed immigrants as we just axed on the winter fuel allowance for pensioners who paid in all their life. Those are the numbers, and that isn't right, surely.
I agree that the pensioners should not be targeted. That's absolutely wrong.
Well, they have been.
Britain's pensions are some of the lowest in Europe. It's an absolute disgrace. Once again, successive Labour and Conservative governments have allowed Britain's senior citizens to be at the bottom rank of pensions in Europe. Switzerland has, I think, £44,000 a year for a pensioner couple. It's pathetic when our pensioner couples are getting half that. We're the 6th richest country in the world. We can afford to pay more, and we should pay more. And those with the broader shoulders, to quote Spider-Man or paraphrase Spider-Man, with great wealth comes great responsibility.
OK, well, my spider sense is tingling. We're getting on.
I agree with you 100% on that point.
Good. Let's move on to an affiliated topic, because immigration is not just a hot-button issue here in the mainland, because today in Ireland, thousands of protesters have been gathering in Dublin. Protesters have been calling on the government to crack down on migration and for citizens to take back the streets. That was going on for several hours in Dublin. Ireland is full, they were crying, and a small counter-protest is also taking place in the city with so-called anti-racist protests chanting "Refugees are welcome."
Refugees are welcome here. Refugees are welcome here. Refugees are welcome here.
They should make a note of all their addresses and see if refugees really are welcome there. Now, throughout the day, there have also been loud but non-violent confrontations between the two opposing groups of protesters. And joining me now, who's been covering this all day for us since 1 p.m. with the latest, is our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie. Dougie, you've been on the front line of this protest all day, started very, very well-natured, and then we saw a line of Gardaí forming up, kettling them down the streets. For those who didn't see the show earlier, can you explain to viewers what made those protesters take to the streets of Dublin today?
Well, yes, Martin, I've just listened to your former guest, and I thought to myself how similar the problem is here in the Republic of Ireland. Now, the Republic of Ireland has seen a massive increase in undocumented immigrants coming in to the island. And the people here are very, very worried, number one, about their safety with undocumented young men coming in. But they're also realists. They are sitting saying, hold on, we haven't got the infrastructure for this. Ireland is a beautiful country. It's a modern European country, but it only has a population of just over 5 million in the south and 2 million in the north. And over the last years, the taxation that they have paid has done very well for them to look after the community that is here. But with this sudden growth in immigration coming in, and most of them being undocumented, it has created real problems inside the whole island of Ireland, north and south. And in fact, in the south, you are seeing many, many small villages and communities having larger numbers of immigrants in them than they do of Irish people. And I've covered this for a couple of years, as you know, and I was told, first of all, this was a working class problem. It was only those that were on the dole that was concerned about it. And of course, that's not true. And in fact, today, I just turned around and looked around me and saw so many middle-class people, grandmothers, mothers with push chairs, working-class men, businessmen. And what they did here, they formed up at 1 o'clock, and by 2 o'clock they marched to the Dáil, the Houses of Parliament in the Republic of Ireland. And they went there to let those that represent them in the Dáil to know that they are unhappy with their decisions. Now, today was the first day that the Dáil has sat since the summer recess, and not one of them came out to hear their concerns. In fact, they were barricaded halfway down the street. So they then decided to march back across the River Liffey, and at the bottom of O'Connell Street is a major bridge where they all decided to sit down and block the road. Now, what really made things worse was, of course, that just coming up to 5 o'clock, the Garda Síochána, the police force here in the Republic of Ireland, decided to push these people up the street, and most of these people are voters, and they pushed them up the street, making multiple arrests on the way up the street. In fact, one of them, if you were listening earlier, was threatening to arrest me if I didn't move on. So this is creating real problems in amongst the society here that are from all walks of life and are really quite frustrated at how they're not being listened to and how hard their lives are outside Parliament. And they're saying, we put yous in, yous are meant to represent us, you're meant to spend our tax money in the right way, and we are feeling the pinch outside. Our taxation is going up, and there's due to be a budget here next week or the week after. It will be one of the biggest giveaway budgets that we have seen, and because they will call a general election by the 15th of November, because this government is in basically the same cycle as the United Kingdom government, and there will have to be a coalition government put in place. So the scenes that we've seen today of the political classes not seeming to listen to those, not even in working classes, but in middle classes, will tell in those elections. And don't forget, the Republic of Ireland 9 times out of 10 has a coalition government, and that means that even the smallest parties that could get in may have power in that case. So real frustration here in Dublin today, and real frustration that they are not being listened to.
Dougie Beattie, fearless reporting as ever, and I'm very proud to say that GB News was the only media outlet at that protest today. Nobody else can be bothered to turn up. Dougie Beattie, thank you very much for putting in the hard yards there. And let's have a quick chat back with my panel, Dame Andrea Jenkins and, of course, Peter Tatchell. Let's start with you, if we could. Dame Andrea, you were nodding quite vociferously there about the fact that the political class couldn't even be bothered to go out and engage with the voters.
I think your reporter hit the nail on the head, actually, Martin, when he said that they're not listening. And I think this is a problem, you know, here in the UK as well. People feel politicians are not listening. Naturally, we're charitable. But when you pay your taxes and you feel that you're at the back of the queue, enough is enough. And I think clearly that's what's happening in Dublin as well.
Peter Tatchell, those protesters today in Dublin, they weren't far right, they weren't knuckle draggers, they weren't racist, they're concerned citizens and they're not being listened to. That is where the problems start.
Well, if I was a member of the Irish Parliament, I would have gone out to meet them, I would have listened to their concerns, and I would have tried to address them. But I would have said to people that the fact that we have these refugees and the numbers are substantial, that is not the core of the problem. The core of the problem is the unequal distribution of wealth. Ireland has plenty of money to provide good quality housing and schools for all its people, including refugees and their families.
But they just took But they just took 14 billion euros off of Apple, and we learned today that money won't go to housing for local people. It's got to be hoovered up addressing this problem. Peter, Andrea, we have to leave it there.